guys, it's Will with Hong Kong Cinema Appreciation Society. Thanks for coming to the channel today. I want to give a big thanks to our new subscribers recently. We've had a huge uptick in the number of subs that we have on the channel, and that's super awesome. And also to the people who have shared our stuff. So people have been telling me they've been sharing our stuff in forums and on Facebook and with their friends and on Instagram and stuff like that. And that's like how you expand your audience, is people who like your stuff sharing it. Like, that's the number one thing. So a huge thank you to everyone who's been doing that. I can't thank you enough. That's really super cool. If you're new to the channel and you're not subbed, hey, guess what? You can sub right now, and that would be a huge help too. If you like the content, that would be awesome. Thank you so much. I don't know if you can tell, but my eye is like red as hell right now. I just had like an allergy attack right before I was recording this video. So I'm going to suffer through it, and we're going to do it, and hopefully my red eye is not too distracting to you. So what are we here to talk about today? We're here to talk about Johnnie Toast Throwdown. So I've already recorded a review of this Blu-ray, and that should be up now on the channel. I will include a link to that in the description below so you can check that out. More specifically, I'm going to be talking about Throwdown and Kurosawa. So if you don't know, this film is kind of dedicated to Kurosawa, and it has a kind of direct connection to Sanshiro Sugata, which Kurosawa's first film was released in 1943. But Sanshiro Sugata was turned into a TV show at some point. It was a Japanese TV show, but the Japanese TV show was shown on in Hong Kong, I believe in the 70s. And Johnnie To was a kid then, and he watched as a kid, and he loved it. And so a lot of the references to Sanshiro Sugata that are in that film are references to the television show. For instance, there's a character who sings the theme song from the television show, and then that same character mentions some of the characters from the TV show, and then there are some other references to the TV show that are in there. So those are not actually direct Kurosawa references, but rather references to the show that was spun off from the Kurosawa film. So that's a little caveat to add there. But so I want to start off by, I'm a huge Kurosawa fan, and I know I've talked about this on the channel before, but I thought I'd give you some background on this before I get into kind of like stuff that I have read and seen about how people analyze this film's relationship with Kurosawa, and then also my take on that as a big Kurosawa fan. So I spent legitimately, no exaggeration, I spent a year of my life watching, there are 30 Kurosawa films, 30 films he directed. He wrote screenplays for a ton more than that. So I'm talking specifically about the films that Kurosawa directed. I spent a year of my life watching all of those movies like 3 to 5 or 6 times, like Seven Samurai, I think I watched 5 or 6 times in that year. Films like The Idiot, I watched maybe like 3 times, and I wrote an essay on every single one of those movies, and I also wrote podcast scripts on every single one of those movies. The only one I ever recorded, the podcast, was Drunken Angel, because I ended up getting into film school at the end of that first year. And so my whole vision for the project was I was going to record podcasts on every episode, and I was going to do video essays on every film, and all this kind of stuff. And so that was kind of just what I was doing with my free time at that point in my life. That was like 10 years ago at this point. So I brought some of my Kurosawa stuff here to show you. I have something like an autobiography, which is Kurosawa's autobiography. And I think this stops at, it's been a while since I read this book, but I think it stops at Rashomon. It goes like through, Scandals in here, which is, Rashomon. Rashomon and Scandal came out in the same year. So, Rashomon is the last film in here. But, there you go. And then I have Waiting on the Weather, which is, Teiro Nogami, who was Kurosawa's like script supervisor for years and years and years. You can see this is an old library copy. But this is just kind of her like recollections on working with Kurosawa for decades. What else do I have over here? I've got The Emperor and the Wolf. This is a double biography of Kurosawa and Toshiro Mifune. This was written by Stuart Galbraith IV, right? Stuart W. Galbraith IV, is that his name? It just says Stuart Galbraith IV on here, so there you go. I guess I made up a middle initial for him. As you can see, this is a formidable book. These are not all of my Kurosawa books. I just brought my 4 favorite ones over here. Kurosawa Film Studies in Japanese Cinema. This is a really interesting book. Mitsuhiro Yoshimoto wrote this one. And I also have Donald Ritchie's book on Kurosawa is really great too, which I have just right over there. But I didn't want to like inundate you with Kurosawa stuff. I just wanted to show you enough to show you that I'm a big Kurosawa fan. I also have this is the Eclipse series of post-war Kurosawa. So there you go. There's that one. There's 5 films in there, and then we've got this. I just brought this because it's kind of an interesting curiosity. It's like a bootleg Chinese DVD of Throne of Blood. And there's a pretty interesting story behind this. Actually, I ordered the Criterion Collection version of Throne of Blood off of eBay, and the seller sent me this, and I wrote them, and I was like, hey, just FYI, that's not the Criterion one. You sent me like a Chinese bootleg, and they were like, oh, sorry. And they refunded me for that, and they sent me the Criterion Blu-ray. So I paid nothing for 2 versions of that movie. So, Sanshiro Sugata is in this Eclipse series called The First Films of Akira Kurosawa. There's 4 in here. It's Sanshiro Sugata, The Most Beautiful, Sanshiro Sugata Part 2, and The Men Who Tread on the Tiger's Tail. So here you go. Sanshiro Sugata. And then there's like a little essay there, and then the film. And then 79 minutes long, 1943, black and white, the first ever film by Akira Kurosawa. I found Throwdown, so I'll say a couple things here. And I've said this before to people who I've talked to this movie about. I didn't really think of Kurosawa. Now, obviously, the film is dedicated to Kurosawa, and they mention Sanshiro Sugata by name. So obviously, I'm thinking of Kurosawa. But I didn't think of the film as like spiritually related to Kurosawa's films thematically, however you want to say that, right? And in rewatching this film and reading essays about it and watching there's on the Blu-ray over here, there's commentary tracks and stuff like that. It's interesting to me because I do see a lot. So like after World War II, Kurosawa made a film called One Wonderful Sunday. It's about these 2 people kind of going through post-war Tokyo, which is in ruins at that time. I think that film came out in 1947. And I actually have that in this Eclipse series over here. And that film is about this young couple going around Tokyo after the war, basically making plans for like, what is our life going to be? What is post-war Japan like? There's so much potential right now that to make this amazing, beautiful future for our country. And a lot of people in the wake of the war felt this really intense optimism because it's like the old way is gone. There's democracy in front of us. We can rebuild from nothing and create whatever we want, and we can build like a utopia. Like there was this whole young generation of people, including Kurosawa, who thought that they could really make this beautiful, meaningful future. And then you have films like Scandal, which is also in this set, which, like I say, came out in 1950, which was the same year that Rashomon was released. That's very Frank Capra-esque and is a very emotional, sentimental film. And Redbeard, actually, even as a pretty late film of that seminal period of Kurosawa's work up until 1965, is a very humane, humanist, beautiful, sentimental film. Ikiru, obviously, is a very sentimental film. And Seven Samurai has a lot of stuff about nobility and virtue and doing the right thing. And I think all of that stuff, that optimism, that we can do it attitude, that the humanity of it, the idea of building something out of nothing, of achieving your dreams. And also, Johnnie To talks about, enlightening the audience through the actions of the characters, through heroic characters, and also, which is something that Kurosawa was like really, really into. He really believed in creating idealistic characters on screen as a way of being instructional towards the audience of how you can behave to make the world a better place, right? And you see that a lot in Seven Samurai and other films like that. And Judo, being like it means way of life, right? I think in Japanese, is that what Judo means? And it's very much about educating the spirit as much as the body. And so you have that kind of element of like nobility and this ancient practice. There's a lot of stuff in Throwdown. I'm sorry, this is like the vestiges of my allergy attack, like my nose is itching. There's a lot of stuff in Throwdown that kind of is about the eternal within the temporal, right? So you have this really great shot of Aaron Kwok's character having a judo match on a dark street underneath this billboard. And the billboard represents the temporal, right, of this economy and the temporal concerns of people and materialism and these things that are kind of ephemeral and fleeting and ultimately meaningless in a long enough timeline, or in that if you're looking at metaphysics in the life of the spirit, the internal life of the person, right? And below that, and essentially ignoring that, but existing within the same sphere of that, is these two characters doing judo, right? So they are pursuing a way of truth and this kind of timeless sense of dignity and like righteousness, right, in the midst of this kind of the temporal concerns of this world that seek to lead them astray, right? And that's a very, very Kurosawa-esque thing. But that being said, I think that Kurosawa is a very complex filmmaker. And Kurosawa was, at the same time that he was making these sentimental films about, like, we can do it, and, like, this attitude of pulling Japan out of the doldrums, or not the doldrums, but, like, the complete ruin of the Second World War, you have a very, very cynical filmmaker who saw that the same people who were in power before the war were taking over after the war. And it was organized crime, and it was the banks, and it was, the aristocratic class that had previously held control, regaining that control. And he was also very pessimistic about human nature, about, atomic power, nuclear war, the human drive to destruction, avarice, these things, right? So he made movies like, I Live in Fear, which is a very bleak film about a guy who's constantly afraid of another nuclear attack on Japan. And you have, The Lower Depths, which is like a really bleak. It's actually an adaptation of a Gorky play. But I was talking about Gorky. I was talking about... Yeah, so, and like, Yojimbo and Sanjuro are interesting because you have this heroic character, but they're in these horrible worlds. And the heroic character is only needed because the world is such an awful place, right? And they go around killing... in Sanjuro, it's outsmarting the bad people. But in Yojimbo, there's a lot of outsmarting, but it also, in the end, comes down to just basically murdering them all, right? All the bad people. And, High and Low is a really, really bleak movie. The Bad Sleep Well, which is, I think, the most underrated of all of Kurosawa's films. It's a super, super bleak film. And so the Johnnie To movie, I think, speaks to a certain spirit of Kurosawa, but I think it's not entirely accurate to say that it's 100% Kurosawa-esque. It takes elements from Kurosawa's career, but Johnnie To is coming from a much more optimistic place, I think, than Kurosawa was in a lot of his films. So, that being said, one of the things that I find really interesting about this film is that I find that it has parallels with Japanese culture beyond Kurosawa. So I actually, funnily enough, I lived in Japan while this film was being made. There's a character in this named Brother Savage, who's this very, like, deadpan, but very weird triad who he's like just this very odd character, but he reminded me of Takeshi Kitano films like Hanabi and Outrage and like stuff like that, where you have these like Yakuza characters who are like brutal and ruthless, but also have this kind of like weird sense of humor and nobility, and also reminded me a tiny bit of some of Takashi Miike's Yakuza films. And then also there are certain elements of this film that remind me of, and I'm going to reach over into my grab bag and pull some stuff out here, Murakami Haruki, who, I apologize that I say his name like that. I lived in Japan. I lived in Japan while they were making this film. The Johnnie To film Throwdown. Obviously it's made in Hong Kong, so I'm not saying I was on the set of the film. It's just an interesting parallel. But I first got into Murakami when I was living in Japan, and they say first name last name, or last name first name in Japan, whereas we say first name last name. So he's called Murakami Haruki in Japanese, but we call him Haruki Murakami. So I call him Murakami Haruki because of that, even though I know here we call him Haruki Murakami. So I have 1Q84 here, which is probably my favorite book of his. It's a tome. It's like 1,000 pages. Wind Up Bird Chronicles is another classic, and it was just, I'm not going to start talking about that book because I won't stop talking about that book. And then I really love this, which is not one of his most well-known books, but South of the Border, West of the Sun. And actually, tonally, this film, or this book, reminds me probably the most of Throwdown out of all of the Murakami Haruki books that I have there. But the point being that Murakami Haruki writes these books where there's very often jazz bars involved, as there is in this with the Louis Koo character running a bar. And you also very often have these kind of odd things like characters kind of appear out of nowhere, and they offer like these epic quests to the main characters. And in Throwdown, the Aaron Kwok character comes out of nowhere, and he challenges the Louis Koo character to judo, and then their partnership, like their friendship, leads them on this kind of wild series of events that comprises the film. And it is this kind of Murakami-esque thing of like this guy appearing out of nowhere to this kind of confused and lost individual, and presenting them with an opportunity to change their life for the better. um, Murakami Haruki stuff tends to be a lot weirder and more kind of like violent psychosexual than Throwdown is, but there is that element of it that kind of like called that to mind for me. So this is something that I could talk about forever. I mean, like I've said before, in my review of the film, there Johnny To instructed his characters, or his actors rather, to speak in like short clipped kind of repetitive phrases so that they sounded more like they were speaking Japanese, because it phonetically obviously sounds very different from Cantonese. There's a signature Johnny To thing of like Hong Kong is always empty in Johnny To's world, and that again strikes me as very Murakami-esque and surreal and almost very Japanese, of having these like empty streets in this metropolis. Interestingly enough, the way they shoot some of the alleyways in Hong Kong also calls to mind like the Edo period alleyways in Sanshiro Sugata. And again, I don't know if you can hear the dog, but she's decided to get on the couch and rip all of the cushions off of it, and is rolling around like she's ready to do some judo with someone. I don't. Maybe talking about this movie is getting her in the mood for wrestling, but she's being very weird right now. So I'm distracted by the dog, but hopefully you get the point, is that I've thought a lot about this movie and its connections to Japanese culture, and there's a ton to talk about here. You could do probably like an entire audio commentary track where you go through this movie and point out all of the different things that seem kind of Japanese or influenced by Japanese sources. So my name is Will. This has been Hong Kong Cinema Appreciation Society. I thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time.